We're really privileged to have Miss Zhao, a distinguished finance professional with over 25 years of experience in corporate finance, joining us today. She holds an MBA from Boston College, and she's held key leadership roles in companies including Vermilion. Currently, she's the Vice President of Finance at Western Digital. We're very excited to hear her insights on career opportunities in finance and the evolving role of technology in the industry. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Miss Zhao.
Thank you, Samuel. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Taya. I'm glad to have the chance to have this 1 hour to spend with all of you to talk about from the Bridge Club to talk about future career opportunities in the finance arena. I want this to be a live discussion, so if you have any questions, please put in a chat box and we can answer all of that toward the end at the Q&A session. And, you know, thank you again for your time. We'll go from here. Okay. First of all, I wanted to clarify a few terminologies. Business is a very broad term. It really covers all of those operational functions in a company is under the umbrella of business. So it can include marketing, planning, demand, supply chain, HR, and finance and accounting, of course. So what I'm going to talk about today is the finance and accounting area. And I'll use a public tech company as an example because every company really can set up their organizational differently. For the positions under finance and accounting, usually the typical undergrad major is finance, accounting, or economics. But literally, it can be every other major, and say, for example, math, right? So when you read news on a company, especially economic news, you always hear two titles. One is the CEO and one is the CFO. This slide is an example of a general version of the CFO organization for a company, which what I mean is those functions that reporting directly into the CFO, as an organization hierarchy. Some companies, HR, IT, or even legal department can also report to CFO. However, those are outside the finance and accounting area. So today, I'm going to talk about those 7 functions a little bit more in detail in terms of what they really do, and then, in the next 2 slides. If we take an example of a public tech company, say for example for 20 or 30 billion annual sales as an example, most of the time the most populated team under the CFO is the accounting team. The accounting team is the most basic team, a function that a company needs. They actually perform all the baseline financial transactions in the company. Say, for example, they recorded all the actual revenue, all the actual expenses, and also including payroll, fixed asset, all of that. However, this group also provided the final product of finance for the company, meaning that they are also responsible for the final financial statements for the company. So for a public company, the accounting group is the function that finally provide the 10Q, the annual report. It's called the 10K to SEC, and the quarterly report, which is called the 10Q, also to the SEC. Okay, so the next function of the CFO group is the FP&A. As this name indicates, this group does the financial planning and analysis. So this group is responsible to forecast future revenue and margin based on historical data, market trend, and economic indicators. And after they forecast the revenue and margin, they will also create and revise a budget for all the spendings, right? Related ones for either capital expenditures or non-capital expenditures. And this group also works very closely with all of the business group they support to make sure the spending is always aligned with budget. Basically, you cannot spend over budget, right? The money allocated to you is what you can spend within the year. And another critical function that this group does is the analysis. They will be analyzing the financial data and also sometimes extract from external data to make sure that to perform some planning, scenario plannings, and then also what if analysis and all of that to provide insight to management to make all the strategic and business decisions. The next group is the manufacturing finance. Not every company has manufacturing finance as a separate group. Say if a company does not have its own factories, usually the cost accounting function rolled up to the first accounting group. However, actually, for example, NVIDIA, they don't have their own factories, right? Their chip is manufactured by the Taiwan, semiconductor manufacturing. So they don't have their factory. So I don't work for them, but they don't have this manufacturing finance group. However, for a company that has its own factory, then manufacturing finance does all the finance related work that is related to factory. The biggest function is that they need to forecast the product cost. If I make a SSD, what is the product cost for that SSD? And they also perform the variance analysis between what the planned cost and what the actual cost come to. The other critical function that that group is performing is the inventory management. This is they manage the data flow of all the goods coming from raw material up to finished goods when it's shipped out of the warehouse of a company. Also, just similar to the FP&A group, this group do all the financial data analysis that is related to everything that is happening in the factory. They're the ones who really look at the factory in more details than anybody else in the company. Now, the other 4 areas under the CFO group are more smaller and specialized groups. For these, they are a lot more smaller in terms of number of people, but they are as critical as all the other groups. Take tax, for example. A lot of the tech companies' tax department is really critical because that's the group that is lay out the tax strategy to optimize the tax payment and the tax, allocation. And, maybe a lot of you, not knowing all the details. Say, for example, most of the tech companies in the Silicon Valley, they will have a big presence in Dublin and in Ireland, Dublin. Why is that? Because Dublin has a straightforward one corporate tax rate of 12.5%, while in US, we're paying average about 28%. So you can do the math yourself, whether it makes more sense to move most of your operations into Dublin or you put it into the United States, say, for example. So the tax department, in addition to make sure that they do the tax reporting well for the state, for the local, and for the country, their most important ones is to do tax planning so that we can, as a company, we can strategy for the company. Then it has the Treasury Department. Treasury Department normally is also a small group, but that group manage all the banking relationship. And in terms of that, they manage the banking relationship with commercial banks where we have our cash accounts, where we can secure a credit facilities to fund our daily operations if we need to. Or, they also actually maintain very good relationship with investment bankers because a lot of the public company will need to get to more capital resources, such as issuing bonds and then also sometimes, issuing stocks in the secondary market. So all of those functions are managed by the Treasury Department. The next one is investor relationships. And you can see that usually investor relationship is only 2 or 3 people. But this is also a very critical function because they manage all the communication with the investors. They actually manage the earnings call for every quarter. They manage those analyst call. When I say analysts, those are Wall Street analysts. And they also manage the shareholder meetings and the investor conference. Those people in the organization, usually 2 or 3, just as I said, and they're very senior people. And those senior people, usually they would work in the Wall Street firms like Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs for quite some years and then get to a level of director or even a VP because we don't need junior person to be there working, right? Those are the high level senior positions. The last one, but also very important, is the internal audit people. And the internal audit group is also a smaller group, but they work with all the functions within finance and outside finance within the whole company. They basically set up controls for the whole company and then do the internal audit for the whole company. So this group usually is the job for those who they assess the effectiveness of whole company's internal control framework. They will identify what the risk of the process of the company. And once we identify the risk, then they work with each business function to create some mitigating control to make sure that all of those risks are in control. And of course, the other big task that this group does is to do internal audit. They make sure that all the relevant laws and regulations are followed by the company, and they also do audits among all the groups to make sure to investigate if there's any potential fraud in the company and if there's any hiccups in the process so that they will recommend to improve. So those 7 functions under the CFO group, they interact very closely with each other. And then within that, they also interact with other internal groups within a company, such as IT, business operations, HR, or they would, and then, or legal, say, for example. However, in addition to all of those internal partners, they also work with external partners that's, outside the company. So say, for example, accounting works very closely with our external auditors. All the public companies will need to be audited by a external party, which is a external accounting firm. Say, for example, all of the names that you would know, we call it Big Four, like the PwC, the EY, Deloitte, KPMG, right? So, and also those groups will interact with some business consulting firms. So say, for example, if we wanted to improve a system workflow, we work with companies like Accenture. And if the company wanted to reassess its pricing strategy, we work with firms like, McKinsey, Boston Consulting to work with them to say, hey, is our pricing strategy right now effective? Again, those are also job potentials for folks from accounting and finance major, because you can work for Big Fours and you can work for those consulting firm at an entry level job, and they need that as well. And finally, we'll work with regulators as well. So SEC in US, since we're a public company, when we file our 10Ks, 10Qs, if SEC has questions, they will communicate with the company through a process called a comment letter. They will send a comment letter to us, say, hey, I have questions on this. So our SEC reporting group will connect with SEC through a response to the comment letter to answer their questions. So those are the interactions that we would have with those external partners. And as I already said earlier in the last slide, for the Treasury Department, they work with the bankers, right? The commercial bankers and the investment bankers. And then for tax, they work with external tax auditors. Financial auditors and tax auditors, they're separate. They're both from Big Four, but they're separate groups in the Big Fours, right? You can be the auditors for the financials, and you can be the auditors for tax. And also, again, all the tech companies will try to optimize our tax strategy. So we work with tax consulting firm like Baker McKinsey. They're the top tax consulting firm as well. And from a tax perspective, of course, you work with the regulators a lot. So in the US, we work with the IRS. IRS can launch audits on our company. And once they launch an audit, it's always $1 billion kind of stakeholder in it, right? And then they actually audit your records for the last 7 years. And most multinational companies will have, operations across the globe, like, hundreds of countries, basically. So we will have international tax group to work with all the international jurisdictions, right? The Singapore government, the Singapore version of IRS, the island version of IRS, say, for example. And then lastly, for the investor relationships, right? Investor relations, they work with invest firms from the Wall Street, the Morgan Stanleys, and then all of those, analyst firms or the industry analysis firms, because we will need to get from them, what is the total market share that we're having, what's the available and what's the future, all of that good stuff, right? So now that you have a general idea of the basic functions of the finance and accounting group, you wanted to have a clear mind of what the daily jobs kind of they do. You have a clear mind, hey, is this what I wanted to do? But if this is what you wanted to do, can I be successful in that one, right? So I would say finance accounting is really not rocket science, right? Everybody can do that, honestly. But on the other side, you really need to like it, and you also need to be relatively good at it. When I say you really like it, later on we can talk about it. But how do you think you can be relatively good at it, right? So it really turns down to a few of the basic points. And it's more common sense. Almost every profession needs that. So you need a logical mindset and approach. When you have a problem, you need to approach it in a logical sense, right? What is really the problem? What is the impact of that problem? Say, for example, right? A logical approach is really important. And then I couldn't stress for more. The next point is, for a finance and accounting professional, you need a balance of detail-oriented and looking at the big picture. Most professions wouldn't allow error anyway, but finance and accounting is an area really does not tolerate any of error, right? If you made a mistake, it's just going to be causing a huge problem. So you just cannot make a mistake. You have to be detail oriented. You look at your work, right, several times, and then make sure you have some checks and balances to make sure that all the errors are detected. But however, you also need to have a balance of the capability of take a step back and look at the picture. Because when you're in the weeds, maybe everything that you think could be right by its own. However, when you take a step back and look in the pictures and look at the interactions between, the different pieces, you could say, hey, this assumption that I make on this is not quite correct. And then because of that, it can skew the whole picture, right? So for that kind of ability, you will also need. And then the next thing is a good communication skill, both verbal and written. And that is, again, it's needed for almost every profession. You need that. But I think finance and accounting, at least from my experience, during my career, quite some years ago when I was ready to be promoted from director to senior director, my role model and mentor, the CFO of SanDisk at that time, Judy Bruner, told me, say, hey, Taya, you really need to practice yourself and say, hey, you can explain a very complicated new accounting rule to our CEO, who is an engineer, who does not know accounting, in 3 sentences, and then he can understand. So it's just an example, but this really gives you an idea of what senior management's expectation about communication skills when you get to a little bit certain high level. When you get into a leadership, usually in the company, when you get to a director or senior director, they consider you as a leadership, right? So when you get to a leadership position, this is where how the crisp and then concise communication that you need to do. And the last but not least is called system savviness, right? And then we can actually talk about it more in the next 2 slides. And then I hope I don't frighten you into the other 2 slides. But this is very, very important. Okay, so I wanted to be very specific about, all of those are very general informations that I'm giving you, right? So, but I wanted to make it down to another level and then say, hey, what can you do now as high school students or as just, freshmen in college or whatever? I wanted you to make sure that you first like it, just like what I said earlier. You have to like it because if it makes you miserable to do the job, you cannot do it well, right? So you have to like it. So how do you think you like it? I would say just examine yourself very thoroughly. List out like a top 5 of your imaginary daily job in the next 5 to 10 years. Are those in any of the 7 functions that I just talked about, right? If you say, I don't like any of these, then maybe you're not going to be happy in a finance and accounting job, right? So this is how you really think through how you like it or not. It's all about you, right? It's not about your parents. It's not about whoever. It's about how you like it, right? It's your passion. So then if you say you like it, then you would say, okay, list out maybe 5 of your top strengths and weaknesses, right? What I really good at it. And then what I really not good at, what I sucks. And then if your top strength and weakness, your top strengths line with what I was just saying, then you say, hey, maybe I'm going to be relatively good at it. But if one of your top weakness is like, I don't like detail oriented at all, then maybe that's not something that you do, right? So then a combination of what you like and what you're good at then can identify if the 7 functions that I just talked under the CFO organization, is this somewhere that you want to do, right? Your high school students, your college, just college freshman or sophomore, you have a lot of time. You don't have to decide it right now, but you need a direction for yourself, right? And then and some students get to that direction early than other people. It's not good or bad, but they're all good. But you need to, toward the end of the day, do that step to make sure that you understand what you want to go to. So once you do that, what do you do right now? Say, for example, if you're a high school second year student, say, for example, to prepare yourself and then later on to get into undergrad and then go to the industry for finance, corporate finance job. What do you do now, right now, right? So based on what I said earlier, you can already kind of sense training your writing skill. Writing skill is very important, right? Go to really study well in your English classes, right? Really, do your writing homework well, right? Prepare your, exercise your writing skills. And then also training your communication skills. I know some of you go to public speech, debate, those are fantastic exercises. Even if you don't do that, try to really prepare your presentation skills for your classes. I know that you have classes that later on has a, group project that you have to put a, PowerPoint deck together, you practiced it, try to know your audience, who are you talking to, make sure that those are the languages that they can understand, to practice more and more. That's all good, right? Those are very day-to-day work that you can do right now. And then of course, train your logic thinking, approach. Whenever you have encountered something, first say, what is really the problem, right? There's a lot of noises around certain things. I say, what is the real problem? And if I identify them, what that problem's impact to whatever. And once you have that, you will say, okay, now in order to solve that problem, to make sure that to mitigating all of those negative impact, here's my solution. But when you get to the solution, you will say, okay, you should take a step further. What is the consequence of that solution for downstream impact? Do I impact other people? Do I impact other processes? Those are the logic thinking mindset you can start train yourself right now, right? When you have a project in your high school and then, in your extracurriculum activities. And then one other thing that is very easy to do and then practical to do is take all the technology classes as you can, right? You don't have to be a computer CS degree to take some computer science basic language classes. You don't have to be a computer science degree to do some coding, because later on, all finance people need that. And that's what I was going to talk about a little bit later, right? So in addition to all of these, I would strongly recommend in your summertime, try to get as much internship and volunteer work as possible, because that's something that you can really think through. Is this what I wanted, right? So say, for example, you vaguely, even after talking to me and then hearing other folks around you, you will say, hey, I wanted to be finance accounting. But if you take a internship to work for smaller companies, then you would say, oh, maybe I don't want to work for a smaller company. I want to work for a bigger company, or vice versa, right? All of those will give you first-hand experience for you to really know better what you want to do, and also build up your resumes and build up your experiences, when you apply college or later on when you go to apply for a job, right? And volunteer work is totally great, right? And then the service and everything, hiring managers always look at those. When we hire new graduates, you don't have a lot of work experience at all. We look at your internship and we look at your volunteer work, right? And that you actually differentiate one student, from the crowd, if I would say that, right? Okay, so last I actually wanted to talk just very briefly about how the finance, say something about the future of the finance and accounting function, right? How it has evolved and then how it will evolve. As we know, this function has changed a lot from the last 30 years, from when I entered the workforce up to now. There's a lot of things has happened, right? AP department, we call it accounts payable, almost none of this is in US right now, right? It's got outsourced, right? In, Philippines, in whatever. And then it's going to be maybe disappeared pretty quickly because of AI and then, all the deep learning that we are going through, right? So it has changed a lot. And that change will only accelerate with the current development of technology, right? So say, for example, a lot of the companies in the Valley has already a separate function called financial system and analytics under the CFO directly. And sometimes if not under the CFO, it's under the CAO, the SVP of accounting and CAO. That group by itself is separated now. So it's the 8th function under the CFO. Right now, earlier I talked about the 7 functions, right? So the new trend is that this financial system analytics becomes the 8th function, directly report to the CFO. And what this group does is totally about the system, right? How this group is going to say, how do we streamline all of those systems and applications that we use in the different stages or the different functions, and how do we make it more effective? So this is kind of related to the next slide, as the next bullet point as well, right? We have honestly hundreds of applications and tools in our daily work environment right now, just for the finance and accounting version, right? And then all the systems need to talk to each other, and all the systems need to flow well with the data, like in and out, right? So then, the next one, when I talk about data, there's so much data that we're dealing with right now. So now we call it data mining. It's really data analysis, but it's a humongous data mining, right? Data analysis. My group, when they're doing their work, Excel doesn't cut for them anymore because the data is explode the Excel file. Excel couldn't handle that anymore. So we're using directly systems and then Power BI, those kind of things to do our data processing right now, right? So these are the last 2 slides I want to show you, but I don't want to freak you out, but because you don't need to know them right now, right? One is the system and the other is the end-to-end process. What I mean end-to-end process is that right now in the company, the most valuable employees that we do is someone is very good at their specific job, but they also understand the front end that affects their job, and they also understand the back end that is following their job. And what I mean by that is that that's called the end-to-end, right? So any of the big company, just take, even $100 billion company, usually as a company, in your big categories, it captures every single activity can be captured into between 10 to 15 end-to-end process. That's what we call it, right? So for someone, say, for example, in the accounting side, they need to understand the operational side of it, and they also need to understand the IT side. So those are the people that usually got tapped onto the shoulder for bigger projects when we have process improvement project, or we have system upgrade project, whatever. Those are the ones that we would tap into their shoulders, say, hey, come, let's you get into the Tiger team and then do the work because you understand the process, right? So I'll show you 2 slides and then, don't be frightened by this. I don't expect everyone to know. And then I said, even in my team of 100 people, more than 100 people right now, I have a team. And then I think maybe only 2 or 3 or 4 people understand the whole flow and can be really the expert of these, right? So this is a financial system architecture and data flow, in a tech company. On the first column, it's the actuals, right? And then the actuals have the different modules and a different system to handle that. But all of those data need to be talking to each other. And then in the middle is the planning one. This is so I would say the actual one is mostly used by the accounting team, right? The middle one, the planning, is mostly used by the FP&A team and then the manufacturing finance team, right? And then, the last one is reporting analytics. This is where the whole company, it's a database for the whole company to draw all of those data out of this, right? And it's not only finance group, right? It's legal can draw, but of course, legal never will be able to do it themselves. They always come to us to run reports and then do the analysis, whatever for them, right? But say HR can do that, from to draw people data, say for example. So if you look at this, that's what you can see why I mean system savviness is very important so that you can understand the whole process, right? And then the last slide that also it's an eye chart. Don't worry about that. This is what I call the E2E process. And earlier I made this comment that even $100 billion company like NVIDIA, NVIDIA actually is a simple company in terms of structure, honestly. But every single activity transaction that happen in a company really can be grouped into around 10 to 15 end-to-end process. So this process that I'm showing as an example is called source to pay. And a source to pay meaning that first, the first step is you really identify who do you want to buy from. We call sourcing, right? Your vendor, your supplier, that's what we call, right? What do you buy from them? Where do you buy your paper from them? What do you buy your gold from them? So say, for example, semiconductor companies, we actually need gold in some of our chips, right? So what do you buy from? Who do you buy from those? This is the first step. So those are not finance and accounting at all. However, when you get to the 10th step of the 10th step of it, it's accounts payable, because everything toward the end that the company buys and uses, whatever, we have to pay the bill, right? So this is where the accounting people have to pay. But sometimes they will have a problem. Whatever documentations is not correct, whatever, they need to troubleshoot at what step in the front end has a problem. So it could be 6.6 when you see that, or it could be 6.5, say, for example, whatever. So that's when I earlier said the most valuable employees that we have, right? We would value right now in a company is somebody who's very good at what they're doing, say in this case, accounts payable. They know how to do it. They also know the earlier steps, what could go wrong that is causing my trouble right here. And also, they should also know, okay, if I do this, will I cause trouble for my next two steps, so that when I make a solution, when I make a suggestion, I actually make a suggestion or solution which is good for the next two steps, not only for me, right? For my own function. Those are end-to-end process that we're talking about. I think we're almost up to my time, and I'm running a little bit short of Q&A, but definitely I'm more than happy to spend more time with all of you when you have questions. So I'll stop right here. Back to you, Samuel.
Great. So right now we're going to enter into our Q&A session. So if you have any questions you have, anything you want more clarification on or you're interested in, feel free to just type into the chat and we'll get the question answered. On my end, a couple questions. One question I had was how you would recommend high schoolers to be able to get those internships you mentioned, and whether you have any tips on how they can get those internships.
Unfortunately, most of the high school internships are hard to get for bigger companies. So say, for example, our company, we have internship for juniors for college, right? Your third year when you're in college, we have internships. And then if we like you, sometimes we actually will extend the offer to you right there, right? Even when you get into your senior in college. So back to your question, Samuel, for high school, unfortunately, most in cases you need to use your network. So, and then most times it's more of smaller companies, right? So, if you have family friends, if you know someone in a more startup company, in a smaller private owned companies, they are the same. As a matter of fact, it's the same, right? It has a lot of, we would say, even a small bird, they have all the functions. So if you work for those companies, the experience is as valuable. So get into the smaller companies as a high school student to do internship, right? And then sometimes if even if you say I don't want to pay, I just want to get the experience, which is also it's really valuable as well. So may not be the best answer you wanted to hear, but unfortunately this is the truth, right? So when my son was in high school, we couldn't get, fund anything in big public companies because it's just not taking high school students. So we end up go to a friend who has a partnership for medical device company. The CFO is one of my very good friend when I was at Philips Medical, right? And then so we got got my son an internship over there, and then but end up he decided it's not his gig, right? He later on didn't go to the finance and accounting area.
Great. Thanks for that advice for high school students to kind of like look towards smaller companies and startups. I think that's a great piece of advice. So James had a question that he sent. So you mentioned that AI has like removed or like reduced the amount of account payables or something along those lines. And James was kind of wondering how big of an impact AI will have on the finance industry, on like jobs and like work in general.
Very good question. And we are also exploring into that in a more detailed fashion because a lot of things are still kind of popping up, but very, even at a top level, we can see that a lot of the basic jobs can be done, can be replaced. So say, for example, as an FP&A analyst, right? Right now, a lot of FP&A are more sexy than accounting, say, for example, but AI actually can replace them very easily. I did point it out that they do the budget, say, for example, even do the forecast of the revenue, right? Right now, a person put up in the system say, hey, this is how much I do for this year, right? And then in the next 5 years, I populated that, and then I make some assumptions to make. All of those can be replaced by AI and then machine learning very quickly, right? So I don't need another analyst to populate the 5 years. The machine can populate it for me. And then I just need a very experienced person who really has insight to look at that basic data and then say, okay, here is, say I'm just taking Apple is one of our customer. Apple is going to, I'm just making that up, okay? Apple is going to stop working on iPhones. Then and at what time, and then I'm going to change my forecast this way, right? But this is going to be a senior person to do that. More of the junior jobs, honestly, that can be replaced very quickly on the FP&A side. Say, for example, the one that cannot be replaced is the value added. And then if I called it more of, above the, the, the ladder, the chains going up a little more, right? But you always need to start at a basic level. So this is where the paradox and then the um a little bit of the conflict that I think um new grads will encounter. So one of the things that if I were to give you a tip, if you really wanted to find, do accounting, go to Big Four when you get out of college. You will do very hard work, but they need your work to be there, right? So the PwCs, the EYs, they need tons of people, right? So if you wanted to do tax or wanted to do financial auditing, because a lot of our industry people at a senior level comes from those big fours, right? They got to a senior manager up to a partner level, then they will come to industry as a director or some, kind of, or senior manager type, and then they move up, right? So, yes, AI will change a lot, unfortunately. But, as I said, it will eliminate certain jobs, but it will create other jobs as well, right? And in that, we don't have a very clear picture as right now, but we can be certain, like, that's why I encourage you guys to say, hey, do some coding, right? You don't need to be, don't it doesn't mean that you want to be CS to do coding, because you later on, we will expect you to do some coding when AI would populate some basic data to you, and you will revise them on top of that. And that's the skill set you will need to do your job well later.
Great. Thanks for that answer. Tammy asked a question. She suggested a hypothetical that if someone isn't detail orientated, do you think that being in investor relations is better than accounting or internal audit, or whether like you recommend like some other specific roles if you aren't detail orientated?
Um, So first of all, investor relationships need to be very detail oriented too, unfortunately. You cannot make any mistake on your earning release, right? Our company just did our earning release for the quarter end of December just a week ago, I believe. Yeah, even the decimal point cannot be wrong. So unfortunately, you do need to. But if you're not detail oriented, a lot of the times, and honestly, I'm not, detail oriented doesn't mean that you tick and tie everything, like all the numbers, but it's more of, if you say you're not detail oriented, but you really like the field, one of the things is to make checkpoints on things, right? Toward the end, you always check. So say, for example, you have a check toward the end, put a formula there. That's what I told my folks as well. Put a formula there. And then, especially in the finance and accounting, a lot of things need to tie toward the end. So if you put a formula and checkpoint, if it doesn't tie, you made some mistakes along the way, right? And then in terms of your other part of your question, among all of those, if I would say that is the least demanding detail, let me even think through. I think they're all tax needed, treasury needed. Sorry, I think they all needed.
It's needed for every job.
It really needed for almost all jobs, yeah. But if you say you like business, back to my original point, you don't have to be finance accounting. You can do marketing, right? I have a friend's daughter. Yesterday we were talking about, she graduated from Berkeley, and she was econ and she was data science, and she now works for LinkedIn in their marketing department, and she did very well, right? So marketing is another one area you can do, right? And then if you're very outspoken and then articulate or whatever, sales is a very good opportunity, is a very good area to go into too. I work with a lot of salespeople in our company, and I respect them. I will never do sales well, right? Say, for example, our sales into the Apple account, Apple procurement is notoriously tough, right? You have to negotiate price with them. Of course, the pricing decision toward the end is made by the company, but the salesperson is very important, right, to do that.
Got it. So Johnny had a question asking whether there's any beneficial summer programs that you would recommend to a high schooler in the Bay Area specifically.
Summer camp, I actually didn't know any summer camp that is particularly just for finance and accounting, but I do encourage you to do summer camp that you have, just based on my own kids, right? I always send them to summer camp whenever that I can. It doesn't have to be very prestigious or very long or whatever, but um, some camps, even for service summer camps, right? Those are good. And then summer camps on some of the basic coding, like, data, summer camp on, I know some of the universities have great summer camps. Like University of Chicago has a great summer camp. You might want to check it out, right? Johns Hopkins has great summer camp. Check it out. But the Bay Area one, I actually am not aware of. Maybe I'll check it out, and later on, if I know anything, I'll let Samuel know, and then you guys, it can be spread it out.
Sounds good. So there was a follow-up question on the internship question.
Mm.
So after utilizing the network and finding companies that may accept high schoolers, what specific jobs should you ask to do or learn about? Because like internships are pretty broad in general.
Mm-hmm. So if you say you secure something in a company, you would, and if you wanted to do, if you found yourself say, I wanted to finance and accounting, just say, hey, I want to work in the accounting department. Anything is good because they're all related. That's what I'm saying. When you get into one position, and that's what you need to do as you later on for when you grow up, when you grow your career, is for you to look at, what other people around you are doing, right? So any of the accounting job or finance job is good to start with. So just ask for it and say, hey, I want to work for the controller. Usually it's the head of the accounting, right? Or I want to work for for smaller company, it's a CFO directly. They have a big title, but the CFO is very different from a big company CFO. But the functions are the same. So, but if you get an internship for a company and you decide not to want it to work for finance accounting, then of course say, hey, can I work for product or, supply chain or work for marketing department, say for example, right? Just ask for it. But for finance, I would say anything. They usually for smaller company, you wouldn't be able to work on their tax right away. Say, for example, even if you want to do tax, right? Because a lot of small companies, so they outsource their tax function. They don't have the in-house resources or expertise right there. Say, for example, in my early years, I did work for two startups, right? We're a public company, but even that, we don't have our own tax department. We actually have Deloitte Touche to work for us. But, me as a corporate controller, I work very closely with them. I examine all their work papers, make sure I understand everything, da, 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 da. But so as, a lot of the internships that you get from a company as a high school, usually it will start with the basic functions.
Got it. So I believe you touched on this question before, but Tristan posed, if junior jobs are going to be replaced, how do we build experience to get to senior positions?
Very good questions. Very good questions. I think the junior jobs are going to replace, and then the conflict, the paradox is that you're only going to get a junior job right now as a high school. But what I would recommend is when you get into the junior jobs, when you're doing it, you wanted to extend yourself. When you put your foot in the door, that's the beginning of your journey, right? You don't stop right there. It's how you lean yourself into the organization and then you start helping. So you will say, hey, I'm doing accounts payable right now, but you're fast. Actually, believe me or not, when you get into with your current education, your current skills, you may don't believe me, but you're going to be quicker than a lot of current employees in the company. So if you finish your job quickly, you could say, hey, who that person can I help you on this, what you're doing? So you kind of trace up to say, hey, what's the next level of job in that company? And then you go approach that person and say, hey, now I finished my work. Can I help you? Start doing the basic things for that person, and then build up that relationship. Tell me, the whole process of what you do, right? You sometimes you may not believe it. A lot of people in the company are very willing to tell you what they do and are very willing to tell you how things are and help each other, you know, just like what I'm doing here today, right? Um, we've worked so many years in the industry. We're very, very much helpful and willing to tell you what we know so that you can utilize it in your future, in your career.
So kind of tying into junior positions and senior positions, Johnny asked the question like, what is the overall like career progression or growth that you could go through in a company in the finance industry?
So, you mean specific me or everybody in general?
So I think he
In
was,
general, right?
yeah,
Oh,
but I'd be curious to learn about your progression as well. That'd be really cool.
okay. So let me talk about in general first, right? So as I was putting it out in the 7 functions, right? Every function will have a junior level, right? So, you make sure that, okay, you started with, if you wanted to be a tax person, you started as a junior tax, right? We have tax analyst one. So whatever they ask you to do, if it is state tax or if it is federal tax, right? Or if international tax, your undergrad degree will facilitate you to do that job, right? But then you really work up your way. So say, for example, if you're doing with federal tax, right? So then you would say, okay, I becomes a manager, a senior manager, a director, all of that, right? So this is very specialized, in tax because tax is a specialized area, right? So now take for example in accounting, in the accounting world, as I was saying earlier, it's the most populated, it has the most people. Honestly, sorry if anybody's family are doing accounts payable or accounts receivable, no offense on them, but those are the transactional work that will be replaced very quickly, right? So if you're looking at the future, try not to start from there, right? I'm being very honest with everybody. Try not to start with, So when you even start, if you have an accounting degree, you would start, okay, I want to be a revenue analyst, right? Or I want to be a general ledger accountant, right? So in that way, you're at a high level anyway above the transaction. So you're more dealing with overall system, you're overall dealing with more of the technical side of accounting. And then again, in those two, sometimes it's more of getting into broader. If you're a revenue person, maybe work a few years in revenue and you lateral move to general ledger, and then so you have a broader base on that. And then you work. So say, for example, a corporate controller, right, when they get to like the top accounting person, say, for example, you know, you usually have worked several jobs along your way in the different functions. And then you're very good at one, but you also touched the other areas. Then you can be a corporate controller so that you know very specific fields like general ledger, consolidation, revenue, but I also know the other one so that I also know cost accounting so that when I review the whole result, I understand what it means, right? I can ask people to talk about it, to explain it to me, or etc. So now back to your question, Samuel. My experience, I actually, because I have an MBA program, I started as an FP&A person, right? So FP&A, I started as a financial analyst that, just doing budgeting, forecasting, but they need the junior level people as well. Those are the one, unfortunately, I'm seeing it will be replaced soon by AI and then deep learning, right? How soon, I really don't know. Next 2 years, next 3 years, whatever. But you always have that because when you work on it, you accumulate insights, right? You started to understand, the industry, and then you started to understand your own business so that then you become a value-added person. So honestly, when I joined Philips Medical Systems, my manager at that time as a director, he threw me a book that thick about nuclear medicine, right? Because we were in Philips Medical, I was in the branch of nuclear medicine, and this is the learning that I need to do to understand the business such that, I can talk intelligently with our marketing people, our engineering people, because I support them for their budgeting, right? And then if I say, when they say I need their project, at least I can ask intelligent questions based on my understanding of nuclear medicine and say, okay, what does that mean? So that I can report to my CFO or at that time, my VP of finance and say, oh, engineering want to do this. I ask the question what it is, and this is what they explain or whatever. That's when you differentiate yourself from the crowd and say, okay, this is a person with potential, right? This is a person that you can get to the next level that you want to put your resources on to develop.
Great.
Hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah. So one final question I had was like, you've obviously worked in the industry for a long time. So I'm kind of wondering like what got you into the industry and like what made you enjoy and like stay in it.
It's the people. I would say it's the people. So first of all, um, it's a funny thing. My mom is a partner of an accounting firm, and when I was young, he only gave me two choices. She said, you can either be an accountant because I'm a partner of an accounting firm, or you be a doctor. And I said, I don't like either of these. And I went to my first undergrad degree is English literature because I love reading. But to the end of the day, and I love writing. But toward the end of the day, after many of those, I ended by getting my MBA. And that really all my experience helps, right? I write well. When I was a technical accountant, when earlier I said we deal with regulatory people, right? In US, we deal with when we were in technical accounting, we actually deal with FASB, which is the regulatory body under Congress to establish U.S. GAAP, right? The general accounting accepted principles, and we write comment letter to them. And I'm the one who actually in the company write those drafts. Of course, the CFOs, even the external auditors, or editors or whatever. And then, believe it or not, my native language is not English, but one of the comment letter that I wrote on the revenue recognition rule, the EY partner on us was like, this is the best accounting, the comment letter that I've seen among our clients. So that's what I'm saying, a lot of times everything else adds up. So what makes me stay in the industry, actually, I stayed in Sandisk. I joined it, earlier I was in the medical device arena and life science for about 10 years. And that time, I was thinking that we were actually working on something valuable that saves life and help people because it's medical devices. And I never thought I would end up in a semiconductor. But when, Vermilion actually went bankrupt before it got FDA approval, I went to Sandisk as a consultant. But I actually, afterwards, I stayed there. And what made me stay there is the people. I mentioned earlier, Judy Bruner was the CFO of the company. She was actually awarded by Wall Street Journal, I think in 2013 or maybe 14 as the CFO of the year by Wall Street Journal. Um, the team was just phenomenal, right? I learned so much from Judy, and then she's my role model and then mentor. So I think it's about, what you do. Honestly, if you tell me that's the thing that I was telling you, is this something that I like to do? It may not be like I really, really, really like it, but I can do it, right? This is among the top of my imaginary jobs, like in the 10 years, I think I can do. And then it's relatively good, right? This is a combination of how do I, and then when you do it really in the day to day, it's about the people around you and what you can learn, right? So that may be one of the tip, like how long you stay within a company. As long as you think you can learn a lot of things, you stay there. At the point you think you cannot learn anything from your people, it's time for you to move and move on. A lot of people do make that mistake that they stay in a company for too long without learning too much things, right? A person can stay in a company as long as they're learning things. There's always new exciting things for you to do, then you stay there, right? But other than that, you should always get to the point that you're learning things.
Yeah, I feel like that's great advice. Always like trying to find an environment where people teach you new things.
Yes, yes.
So,
And this is where I would say, I'm not against smaller companies, but based on my experience, when you first started, go to bigger companies because they have better infrastructure, a learning framework to train you. So this is when I would say go to the big fours, right? The big fours, if you're really into accounting, they're really great place to start. You feel like you're pressured, right? I have a friend's son who went to EY. It's really too busy, and then he went to Grant Thornton. But this is where you learn, right? If you feel like, hey, I'm really, really comfortable when you first started your career, then you need to ask, are you really squeezing all your juices out to learn, right? So, bigger companies like, say, for example, when I was at Philips, we have an account, we call it a Philips Accounting University because we have so much resources that rotate our people and then give them to learn. And previously in HP, when HP in its heydays, they have HP University because this is where the HP accounting finance department train their people, right? So those are the ones that resources that usually you don't get in a smaller companies. And then big companies also have more rotation, right? Like our company, we have undergrad rotation and MBA rotation, and we give them 3 years and then 3 positions for them to rotate so that they can figure out what they really wanted to do afterwards, right? And of course, they don't have to stay with it after 3 years. They can go find a job, but at least they kind of experience the different taste of different things and they can figure out what they really want to do. And those are the resources that usually small companies wouldn't be able to provide.
great. Thanks for answering all those questions. And once again, thank you for spending your time to like show us a lot about the industry and to help us learn a lot of information. And then thank you as well to everyone who showed up to the seminar. I think that's all for the seminar and the questions. Could you quickly go to the last slide for a quick announcement?
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah. So once again, thank you everyone for showing up. So Bridge is dedicated towards like helping students have educational opportunities through this seminar, through different classes. So if you're interested in donating or volunteering, feel free to send us questions to our email right there, thebridgecontacts@gmail.com, or scanning the QR code to go to our website.